Welcome, everyone. This is week 12 of our podcast. And because it's week 12, we'll be talking about the service industry. And today, we'll be talking about our article. Are you in this country? How local social relationships can limit the globalization of customer service supply chains. All right, why don't you talk a little bit about the author of this article?
I would, before we talk about the whole problem, the solutions, and many implications, and the connections that we have found, let me talk about the author herself. Angela Cole is a prominent researcher in the fields of gender, work, and organizational sociology. She particularly focuses on challenges faced by women as they advance in their careers. She has been actively involved in the gender studies and researches to promote awareness on the gender and sexuality topics. In terms of her education, she has a bachelor in social sciences as well as a doctorate in sociology. And to talk about her experiences, she has a vast majority of experiences, starting from being a lecturer, professor, to becoming a senior research fellow in many different fields of gender, work, women's studies, and many other niches. So let's right now talk about the whole problem and the sort of a summary of the article itself. Angela Cole, she mainly talks about the cultural, social, and economic challenges of outsourcing UK call center jobs to India in the early 2000s, which pretty much highlights the implications of the global labor markets and what it does in the customer service operations. The article itself examines the implications of offshoring customer service roles, such as call centers, and discusses how local social norms, communication styles, and labor practices affect the success of the global supply chains in the service sector. Angela Cole at the same time argues that even though outsourcing it aims to reduce the costs and discipline the labor force, and potentially it could be beneficial for the companies, at the same time there are a lot of implications to that. Since the process itself, it oftentimes encounters challenges due to localized skills and social interactions that are pretty much hard to replicate in other countries by outsourcing. And she also talks about the political side of the economic change in the customer service operations in the UK. So I would like to all of you right now to listen carefully to what we're going to talk about and try to get as much knowledge as possible. With this being said, I would like to transition and give my word to Jake to focus on the specifics of the article.
Thank you very much, Artem. So I'm going to be moving on now to discuss the article in more depth. So throughout the article, the author Coyle discusses three core issues centering around Banco, a banking institution that operated telephone banking services in the UK and briefly in India. The company opened in 2001, initially employing 300 workers and expanding to nearly 1,000 employees in the following 2 years. The customer services focus on cross-selling financial products such as credit cards, insurance, and loans through its telephone banking operations. This also provides assistance to customers with various routine transactional problems, banking needs, and account management. The author sources testimonial introduced straight from Banco employees themselves who are in various positions in the company, in addition to also using public documentations for added accuracy. So now we'll be moving on to analysis on Banco's operations in the UK that were conducted in 2004 and revolves around the issues of struggling to manage. Now, Banco at the time in the UK was centralized around several smaller service centers in one remote operation center that were serving customers nationwide, and they worked extended hours. The workforce consisted of 85% of frontline customer service advisors, 70% being female staff, as at the time they were believed to possess better communicational and service skills compared to their male counterparts. With the rapid growth and expansion in the UK, there came problems. The target employee was working mothers in their late 20s and 30s as they valued maturity and stability over flexibility. However, their primary employees happened to be students or young adults ranging from the ages of 16 to 24, which is why they constantly had to hire new employees to keep up with demand. Now, much of the service sector industry became part-time as a result. During their growth phase, this was equivalent to approximately 100 to 150 staff every 4 weeks for 4 months, during their rapid growth phase in the early 2000s. Call agents also face challenging time constraints, having only 3 minutes per call to provide service assistance and pursue sales initiatives. There were early challenges of roughly 30 to 40 customer service advisors leaving monthly, resulting in training costs of €5,000 per new hire. Management saw long-term employees ideally having 5-year commitments while also making new hires undergo an 8-week training program split between theoretical and supervised practical experience. These challenges in recruitment were partly blamed on the focus on quantity over quality, which is why Banco had to stress their training program in the following years. Now, some of the students working in the company had criticized having poor pay, and this essentially resulted in increased turnover for the company, as I kind of mentioned before. The contracts provided employees with several benefits, such as 22 days of paid sickness leave and a paid holiday leave, as well as performance bonuses. And this led to more problems of employees taking advantages of these bonuses. Team leaders reported that employees had as low as 47% attendance rate, while the job required an attendance rate of 95%. The disciplinary action to address this issue was lengthy, roughly 18 months, and due to the sheer number of turnover and new hires, implementation of an effective control system was difficult. However, in about 3 years, management did develop better control to mitigate such problems, and in 2003, in October, the telephone bank in the UK moved its operations to India. The challenges faced in the UK influenced this decision to include, but are not limited to, recruitment complications, local labor markets, operating costs, and layout sustainability, which brings us to Banco's move to India and the issues that revolved around that. So essentially, Banco outsourced its UK telephone banking operations to a major Indian BPO company throughout a 5-year subcontract, establishing operations on 2 floors within a 30-story building. They implemented a strategy known as the Life and Job, involving 32 detailed SLAs, which means service level agreements, that acted as regulation for specific targets, occupancy rates, workforce utilization, sickness levels, and holiday allowances. They also specified metrics for phone time versus training time ratios to maintain brand consistency and faculty featuring Banco's corporate colors and logos. So all in all, the move to India was, in theory, more profitable for Banco as technology was more advanced, aka the center operated 24/7 with real-time monitoring screens that displayed various performance metrics, the labor was cheaper, and the work environment was more optimized, and every factor seemed to essentially lead to an increase in profit and efficiency. This center also maintained coordination with its UK operations team through daily conferences or planned calls and emails. However, this active globalization of expansion of the service calls was not without its problems and challenges. Banco experienced challenges in replacing experienced UK staff with inexperienced Indian workers who lacked cultural context and banking knowledge. UK workers already had trouble communicating with regional accents such as Welsh, and the Indian accent posed more issues on communications between the two of them. In addition, UK advisors had to voice coach and train Indian workers for about 2 weeks through mock calls before the launch of the Indian location, and that still presented many problems. In addition to representing the customer service expertise required by Indian workers seemed to be significantly longer than their UK counterparts, and this led to a customer revolt. Essentially, customers refused to interact with Indian service advisors and were often forcing them essentially to be placed on a line with a service advisor from the UK. And this caused so many problems for Banco that they decided that the benefits of cheaper labor and more efficient operations just did not exceed the cost of customer backlash and increased training time allocated to Indian employees, which is why they eventually decided to move their operations back to the UK and focus on expansion near their original base of operations. Now, we will talk a little bit more about the author's conclusions on the article. So, Aliza, I think you have something to say about the author and their conclusions.
So Angela Coyle highlights that outsourcing fails if its cultural differences and customer needs are ignored. With Banco, the focus was more on saving money that hurt their overall service and trust of customers.
Hey Alfonso, didn't you write something about
RBC?
Yeah, so I think to fully grasp the concept of outsourcing, we should look at another relevant real-world example which applies actually here locally. So in 2013 here in Toronto, we saw a similar example of not only customers and employees, but also communities as a whole protesting against outsourcing. As a CBC interview with an RBC employee, David Morrow, went public, he claimed that RBC was replacing Canadian employees with temporary foreign workers, which is not only considered highly unethical, but also illegal. So diving deeper into the issue that was raised, foreign employees were actually being brought into Canada, into RBC's Toronto offices, where employees would be tasked to show these foreign employees how to fulfill their tasks prior to being dismissed. Now, these foreign workers were employed by a multinational outsourcing firm from Bangalore, India, called iGate Corporation, a company that provides offshore outsourcing technology-related services, including BPO services, similarly to Banco's situation. And these two companies actually worked together closely for about 10 years. So after this, RBC suffered calls for boycotts from all of its stakeholders, whether that be employees, customers, even the government, and investors, as Canadian investors warned that they would withdraw over 1 billion Canadian dollars of invested funds from RBC. Also importantly, internal impacts were faced as employee unions faced high concerns of fear of job instability. Hence, this situation highlights the importance of public perceptions and the effects of brand image and how perhaps cost saving should not be the sole primary focus of outsourcing, because qualitative aspects of a corporation like reputation can have a much more significant impact in comparison to simply cutting down wage expenses, which is a fairly similar situation to Banco's. Firstly, in terms of the nature of the approach which both companies had towards outsourcing, as both firms were looking for a cheaper alternative to ordinary day-to-day operations. However, after this, these companies quickly learned that outsourcing is not simply an economic decision and can have various aspects which go much further than that, which saw them reverse their decisions eventually to outsource for their respective reasons, whether that be backlash from stakeholders or internal and cultural challenges.
As previously stated, Angela Coyle says that outsourcing often doesn't go well when companies prioritize saving money over understanding cultural and legal impacts. Both Banco and RBC showcase this.
Warren, didn't you mention something about jobs being outsourced to AI?
A new wave of outsourcing has begun in the call center industry. While in the 2000s, it was a massive move to India, in the 2020s, it's a move to AI and automation. Since 2014, major players in the call center industry, like David Theody, CEO of Telestra, and Peter Monk, GM of Concentrix Australia, have predicted the takeover of these types of service jobs by software technology. Their relative simplicity of a call center job made it an obvious choice for automation. And although it didn't happen in as short of a time frame as they anticipated, the steps to get to that point are actively being followed. Even now, in its relatively primitive state, it's shown how useful it can be. A journal by Routledge, Taylor, and Francis Group, as well as the Harvard Institute of Technology, found that in its current state, AI-based conversational agents can reduce business costs by up to 30%, with little impact on the number of calls received, albeit with a slight increase in the length of calls. With the way that AI is advancing and the advantages it already has, some newer companies are designing their business model with AI in mind, intending to hire little to no humans at all for their call center needs, as to begin with. To be clear, however, very few companies have actual AI in use in their call centers. Rather, they use natural language processing systems and interactive voice responses to automate their simpler tasks. All of you watching have most likely encountered at least an AVR at one point. If you've ever tried calling a business and were met with an automated voice telling you to press a number to be directed somewhere else, that was an IVR. Now, the reason why it's become so common in recent years is because of the advancements made to natural language processing systems and IVRs, which have made them less clunky and awkward and thus more appealing for customers to interact with. In a way, it almost mirrors the cultural training that Banco's Indian call center operators underwent in order to adapt to the UK standards, as both were investments made by their parent companies intended to improve their communication skills. That said, just like the Indian call center operators, AI and IVR have not gained the full trust of the general public. There still remains a bias against AI, which, according to the journal mentioned earlier, stems from the lack of feeling and empathy from the AI. To quote a participant of the study, rather than just understanding what I'm typing, I want chatbots to understand, to feel what I'm feeling. The inability to recognize and diffuse an emotional situation is indicative of a greater problem that AI and IVRs are currently facing, that they are more suited towards simpler tasks such as changing passwords or providing basic information. As it stands, current AI and IVR technology is not flexible enough to adequately fulfill more complex tasks asked by the average user. While some seasoned users may be able to utilize it to its full potential and ask the right questions to get the right answers, the same cannot be said for the newer users who, in these cases, often have a far worse experience. With that in mind, it's clear why demand for human service is still strong. When given the option to, users often transfer to human operators because people are still reluctant to interact with this new technology, especially one that's known to have so many limitations. While the outsourcing of call center jobs to India ultimately ended with those many jobs leaving India just as quickly as it came, it's uncertain if, and in my opinion, unlikely that AI will have the same fate. Many tech companies are actively working to make AI and IVR more human-like and capable, and many companies are already dead set on using this technology in the call centers. But at the end of the day, only time will tell if AI and IVR will reign in the call center industry. Aryan will tell us about globalization and its effects.
Limitations of globalization. Globalization is often recognized for connecting economies, fostering innovation, and opening up new opportunities. However, it also comes with significant limitations that can negatively impact businesses, societies, and individuals. These limitations include economic vulnerability, which is globalization can lead to over-reliance on interconnected supply chains, which may collapse during crises. It can also lead to inequality, so wealth and benefits from globalization are often unevenly distributed, leaving smaller players in less developed regions at a disadvantage. It can also lead to cultural erosion. Globalization promotes cultural globalization pushes, often at the expense of local traditions and identities. There's also an environmental cost factor. So the push for global trade and production leads to unsustainable resource use, which then leads to pollution and climate change. The example I want to talk about is the Starbucks expansion to Australia in 2000 and 2008. In 2000, Starbucks entered Australia, a country with a mature and sophisticated coffee culture. Despite its global success, Starbucks faced significant challenges in adapting to the local market. By 2008, it had closed 61 of its 84 stores, marking one of its most high-profile failures. Starbucks' key challenges and limitations, there were many, one of which was the cultural challenges. Unlike in the US, where Starbucks popularized its third-place concept of coffee shops, Australians already had a well-established cafe culture. Independent coffee shops prioritize relationships, personalized service, and high-quality espresso, all of which Starbucks failed to replicate. Australians rejected Starbucks' standardized approach, seeing its sugary drinks and mass-market strategy as a mismatch for their taste and culture. Starbucks also rapidly expanded without too much demand. Starbucks opened up too many stores too quickly, saturating the market without building organic demand. This approach alienated customers who viewed Starbucks as imposing rather than complementing the existing market. Starbucks also failed to compete with the local competitors. Competitors like Gloria Jeans and boutique coffee shops thrived by adapting to local preferences. Starbucks struggled to differentiate itself, offering inferior coffee at higher prices. Its attempts to Americanize Australian coffee culture backfired. Like Starbucks, Banco underestimated the importance of cultural alignment and adaptation in their expansion. Both companies relied on replicating their existing models in foreign markets without actually tailoring to the local preferences and the wants of the people. For Banco, this resulted in customer dissatisfaction with Indian call center representatives despite extensive training. And Starbucks' failure to adapt eroded trust in the brand, similar to how Banco's outsourcing decisions caused the customer revolt and damaged its reputation in the UK market. The Starbucks example underscores the limitations of globalization. It highlights how a failure to balance standardization with localization can lead to significant financial losses and reputational damage. For business leaders, it reinforces the importance of thinking globally but acting locally and adapting strategies to meet diverse consumer expectations in international markets.
Wow, everything said today was so interesting. Lisa, what do you think about this?
Overall, globalization and technology like AI can save companies money and make businesses more efficient. However, these strategies can often go wrong when companies ignore cultural differences and customer needs. We have seen this example from Banco, RBC, Starbucks, and AI in call centers, which show that businesses must focus on both local and global challenges to succeed. Some challenges that we noticed were, while globalization connects businesses worldwide, it also faces challenges like ignoring local cultures and needs. Reputation matters in a way where trust and customer satisfaction are more important than saving money. AI improves efficiency, but it lacks real communication with humans, which makes it harder to use in complicated tasks. Some strengths that we noticed were that outsourcing and AI helps reduce expenses. Technology and globalization make it easier to grow in markets. AI and technology can improve services when used thoughtfully.
Thank you guys for listening to our podcast. We hope to see you next week. Bye.